All right, everybody, let's do this. I am Drew McManus, the author of Adaptistration, and this is my podcast, Shop Talk, where I invite captivating guests to talk about engaging topics connected to the orchestra business. First up is Dr. Eric Esparza, is the Director of Choral Studies, Vocal Area Coordinator, and Diversity Advocate at Chicago's DePaul University. He conducts the DePaul Chamber Choir, Concert Choir, and Symphonic Choir, along with teaching courses in choral music. Dr. Esparza serves as the Repertoire and Resources Chair for Lifelong Choruses on the Illinois American Choral Directors Association Board, for whom he also chairs the Diversity Initiatives Committee. Originally from San Antonio, Texas, Dr. Esparza holds a Bachelor of Music degree in vocal performance, as well as a Master of Music degree in choral conducting from the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University. He also holds a Master of Arts degree in Arts Administration from Florida State University, where he was a university fellow. He earned his Doctor of Musical Arts degree in choral conducting from Boston University, and he remains active internationally as a singer, conductor, and music editor. Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And thank you for being here. Next up, we have Michael Lewanski. Conductor, educator, and writer Michael Lewanski is a champion of new and old music. His work seeks to create engaged connections between audiences, musicians, and the music that is part of their culture, society, and history. Based in Chicago, he is conductor of Ensemble Daliente and associate professor of the DePaul University School of Music. A native of Savannah, Georgia, he began conducting at 13 and at 16 traveled to Russia to study at the St. Petersburg Conservatory. From there, he moved on to Yale University, where he continued to develop a broad and expansive view of music. He's much less concerned with defining what music is or isn't than making space for what might be. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Drew. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And you started at 13, which is slightly earlier than most conductors typically decide to go into conducting.
Yeah, I was an annoying student.
Does that also say why you ended up getting shipped off to Russia at 16?
I think at the time, I had this Russian violin teacher in Savannah, and they specialized very early there. And I think I assumed at the time that my violin teacher was just doing me a solid, but now that you suggest it, maybe it was a way of just getting rid of me for a year.
It certainly is a path less followed, let's say, than where most conductors come from. And that alone is going to contribute to today's topic, which I've invited both of these guests on to talk about the larger academic-pro relationship. Both Eric and Michael come from working in both of those fields, but let's say I think it's fair to say that your day jobs are in academia. Fair to say?
Yes.
Good.
Literally true.
Literally true. But you obviously have work in the mainstream professional sector as well. So you've got a unique perspective that I'm looking for on this, because this is something that to me historically has always seemed like an odd divide. You go to conservatory, you go to music school, you get your degree, you get out, and you've either started to then move toward being a performer or trying to get work in the mainstream professional performing arts sector, or you start to move into academia. And if you move into academia, it seems like the more you go in either direction, the harder it is to really develop a career where you're known as a professional as both. You either get branded or labeled, let's say, as an academic or not. And I'm curious to see what your experience and what your perception is on this. I mean, am I making more out of this than what it really is, or do you think there's really something there? Eric, let's start with you on that.
Well, good question. I think like most answers, there's a spectrum. So I'll say yes and no to answer your question. Because there are certainly members of academia who would consider themselves very, very active performers. But it's a give and take, right? The more you are away, performing, the less you are available in a lot of cases for the teaching or your students, or you might have a sub or be on a leave, what have you. And then on the flip side, you will have people who, even who retire from performing altogether and just say, that's no longer part of my life. I'm going to focus on teaching. But there are people, I think, that do split the middle pretty decently. And I think if you were to tell them, well, you're really just a teacher, I think you could find people that would be like, excuse me? No, I do a lot, And if you told the same person, well, you really just perform, right? And they'd take umbrage with the fact that they are teaching students or giving Zoom lessons or what have you. So, a non-answer is a little bit of all of it.
Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree that, well, maybe my version of, rather than saying both yes and no, I think what I'd say is there is definitely a divide. It's definitely a thing. It's getting to be less of a thing than I think it used to be, is my sense. And I might have, I think there are probably good and bad reasons for this. And I think, and I'm very curious to know in post-pandemic life, if that's ever a thing, if this further erodes this distinction, right? Because I think that if we've learned one thing from the pandemic, specifically in the sort of like professional arts sector, is jobs that were formerly thought of as being extremely secure, full-time orchestra jobs, say, with tenured full-time orchestra jobs, are, as we've seen, significantly less secure than we realized they were. And and Eric and I both are fortunate to have actually quite stable jobs. And so I think I wouldn't be surprised if we just saw more movement in between the sectors going forward than we have in the past. I think also, again, a sort of a mixed, the entrepreneurship sort of discourse in academia over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, about which I have mixed opinions and feelings, has, I think, also created extra kind of people that are pursuing, that don't feel the pressure to choose one of those two career paths. This is actually something I've been thinking a lot about with my students recently. I've been trying to sort of figure out, particularly in the new music realm, some of my students really just want to do new music stuff for a living, and how do I advise them on a career path when there isn't really a set career path in the way that, say, getting an orchestra job or getting a DMA and then getting a teaching gig.
Let me follow up on that a bit for some added context on this, because you're both at DePaul University. Can you both give an overview of roughly what degree path most of your students are moving into? Are they performance majors, the education majors, are they something else?
I'll go first. Speaking for the vocalists, it really is a mix. We do have performance majors. I would say right now at DePaul, I would say it's actually pretty evenly split between people who are pursuing performance, people who are studying voice, but perhaps with a looking to music education. And then the other groups of majors that include sound recording technology, performing arts management, and the Bachelor of Arts or composition. I feel like it's maybe a third, I guess, a third, and a third right now.
That's actually a pretty interesting split and a little different than what I was expecting. Michael's the same thing true in the orchestra circuit?
I would say for the instrumentalists, probably the majority of them are performance majors, particularly in the ensembles that I work with.
Okay.
But yeah, the majority are performance majors for sure.
And I will say at the master's level, it is all performance. So that's a distinction I should make.
Michael, I want to follow up a little bit then with, if you have a larger ratio of students that are moving into performance, is this even a topic that comes up with your work with them, talking about, when you get out into your career, whatever direction you're going to go, do any of them ever think about, well, maybe I'll be seen as more or less or different than what I think if once I'm out, I consider a teaching job?
I would say the question of their professional life is something that is certainly constantly on their mind. I don't think necessarily that academia in music as a field always does a great job of talking about that.
Interesting.
You do a great job of talking about it, Drew. I'm not sure if the field does a great job of talking about it. But it does come up a lot, and I would say quite simply, students in educational programs don't always have, it's not their fault, just because they're in school and they may not have ever been in the vast majority of them haven't been in the professional field. They don't necessarily have a great sense of what post-collegiate life is going to look like. So I don't, they are very anxious, I think, these days more than ever. I think there's a lot of concern about getting work. Sometimes they're so obsessed with getting work that we forget to actually talk about the education. But it's a major concern for them, and I don't know if necessarily my students are thinking about, should I go into pursuing an orchestra job or pursuing a teaching job, maybe until the very end of their career.
Interesting.
Or sorry, until the end of their time in an educational institution.
Gotcha. To dive into this a little bit more, do either of you actually have students that are conducting majors?
I don't.
Yeah, we don't have a conducting degree at DePaul, though I do have an independent study student who is very talented.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, my mind goes back to a poll that I did at Adaptistration back in 2016. And it touches on this topic a bit in that I asked readers to give their input in a survey form on whether they thought it helped or hindered a conductor's career if they held an academic position. And the results were really actually pretty fascinating. Maybe surprisingly or not, I'm curious to get your feedback on this, but there was overall negativity in the responses that came in from those that felt that having an academic position in general garnered the greatest overall potential for negative favorability in a conductor's career. You've both been at this for a while. You're clearly not right out of school. What's your own experience in that? Do you actually encounter any kind of bias against conductors that have full-time academic jobs?
I don't think that I have personally. And I think especially on the choral side, there is such a culture of going through reputable music schools. I mean, this is like the chain, right? It's about where you got your degrees and then where that launched you to. And I do think in the choral conducting degree track, there is a lot of focus for conductors on the fact that having a degree from X, Y, or Z will position you better to get an academic position. I think that actually just has to do with the way that the choral conducting field kind of is. I think a lot of people would see a really nice job setup to be this kind of triumvirate of a university job, a church job, and a community job somehow, and if you can get those three locked in, that a lot of people see that traditionally that was a real venue to success, I think. And I do think that is changing, that is evolving. But I think because of that, I've just never experienced, and I don't know, because I don't know the people who turn me down, why they turn me down. But I mean, I think the people that every kind of gig I've gotten, I think that my training and or the fact that I have a university job right now has only helped that circumstance.
Well, you went right in the direction I was hoping you were going to go with that, which is to focus really on the choral perspective for this. Because, folks listening to this podcast, a little bit of context will help from the standpoint of the difference between the way singers and instrumentalists are treated in post-academic career. For example, professional symphony orchestra, obviously the musicians are paid. Obviously the music director is paid and the highest paid individual. Not the case for the chorus. Even larger budget organizations can have a completely volunteer-based chorus, where even though they went to the same schools as the instrumentalist and have the same degrees, for some reason they don't get paid. And if they are paid, I can't even think of one off the top of my head that pays them as much as the instrumentalists get paid, even on a per-service basis. And for the conductors that I've worked with as well, the choral conductors never make as much or seem to be as valued monetarily to the same degree that the instrumental conductors are. This is a bit of a sidebar with this, but Eric, I'm especially interested in getting your insight on that topic, if it's something you want to talk about.
Well, I think one of the challenges there is if you were to land a job at a very well-known, reputable orchestra that does great work, the choral conductor often serves as a preparer for the instrumental conductor. So it's not like we're going to do Verdi Requiems and half the time it's conductor fabuloso and half the times it's choral conductor fabuloso. It is always going to be instrumental conductor fabuloso, and let's give choral conductor fabuloso a bow at the end of the show. So I mean, and not that there isn't value to that work, because there is, but if you're a conductor and you want to conduct things, there's a ceiling there that isn't the best use of your skill. So I think that's why you often see in cities too that there are other organizations that maybe don't have the same sort of monetary backing and as like the hugest organizations in that city, but that a choral conductor has managed to put together this organization, or they found this conductor that will do choral orchestral works, that will do large works, and that conductor can conduct them and have this rapport with the singers that is their own thing, and it isn't a preparation job. So that's always a challenge. So I mean, I know lots of great conductors who would pass that top job just because they would never get to do the conducting, and so that's not what everyone's looking for in that respect. But I will, sorry to ramble on, but I will say too, you are correct with the singers. Often, especially in a community chorus, you will have the singers paying membership. There'll be membership dues
Right.
that they would be willing to pay to be part of the organization. It's not even just volunteer for zero. It's like you pay and they contribute to the financial structure of the organization. But you're right, if you did land a job that was, I sang in the Houston Grand Opera Chorus for a while, and that was a paid gig. Obviously the Met Chorus is a paid gig.
Mm-hmm.
And these are, they are compensating people, but if you go head to head, those probably aren't going to be the same pay rates as, your first chair blank, obviously.
Michael, you look like you had things to say.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the stuff that Eric, that you're both talking about is really real. And I think I was just thinking, I think there are probably both kind of current socioeconomic reasons for it and also kind of historical reasons for it, which is to say that I think that, like, since the beginning of the 19th century, philosophically speaking, like, music audiences have been conditioned to think that instrumental music is better. Like, this is just this is just a philosophical truth that you've got someone like E.T.A. Hoffman writing at the beginning of the 19th century, essentially trying to, someone who wrote about this, really good scholar with 3 names. When I remember what it is, yeah, exactly. When I remember what it is, we can put it in the show notes. But who essentially, right, the scholar has written about the fact that in the early 19th century, a bunch of philosophers wanted to intentionally elevate the status of instrumental music. And I think then you get someone like Hans Lick in the middle of the 19th century, and you get the kind of doctrine of absolute music. And then you get symphony orchestras starting in places like Chicago, with mostly German-speaking musicians, and sort of the fetishization of the German, tradition. Not there's anything wrong with that music. I love that music, but I do think that there is some subtle conditioning to audiences to think that symphonic music is higher or more transcendent or something like that than opera, and opera's cool, but it's like a little bit more lower class, even though we wear fancy clothes to the opera. And I think maybe there's something similar, just I think in our field, singers tend to be looked down on, whether jokingly or not. There's always this kind of joke where like someone was just saying something about this on Twitter the other day, where someone will refer to like a conductor will say, "Hey, musicians and singers."
Right. We hate that.
Yeah.
For
Right.
obvious reasons, but it. Sorry,
Yes.
Michael, I don't want to interrupt.
No, even though that's a joke, I think that reveals the underlying truth of how singers are viewed. So.
And by all means, you can step on each other's words all you want. It's definitely not an overly polite podcast.
Sure.
You can interject when necessary.
Well,
But
can I add to something then, or can I
please,
respond?
yes.
So, sorry, Michael. I would also I would add to what you're saying that I think this is changing still, but I would say too there can be this sense that like the singers who are doing this for free should be honored to come on stage with so and so and perform with them. Like that is your honor. And it is an honor, but it should be a collegial honor, right? It's like we're all honored to be performing so and so's music, not working with so and so necessarily. I mean, how many times would you tell an orchestra, you're all going to go play for free with this choir, and it's your honor to go sing with them? I mean, even if it was the best choir in the world, right? And that's a neither here nor there distinction, but it just kind of it does slide one way, and historically more so than now. I do think now you at least have some unions, and you have people kind of saying, hey, let's not undervalue what we're doing here. We are contributing members. You couldn't do the Verdi Requiem without us, so what are we going to do about the situation?
Exactly. And without even really trying, I think we've kind of stumbled into a really good parallel universe, so to speak, which is whatever it is that is causing the gulf between a stigma that could be potentially placed on academia, thinking with conductors especially, to those that don't hold academic positions, is not in itself dissimilar at all from the distinction between singers and instrumentalists, even though they're both musicians, and it's not just an unintentional punchline. Yeah. So it's actually keep moving in that. I'm almost more fascinated to kind of dive into that than the original topic now at this point, which is to help figure out why this distinction exists. I know from an arts administrator's perspective, and Eric, you have a degree in arts administration, so you likely have both academic and practical understanding of this as well. Your job is to do the most you can with the smallest amount of resources that you can try. So, when I work with artists doing overscale negotiations or contract negotiations, one of the first things I'll prep them about is you have to not get upset with the fact that your employer's job is to get you to work for as little money as possible. That's how this relationship works. It's hopefully not spiteful, but you're going to see some things that you may not be terribly happy about. And how does that reconcile with the difference in pay and stature and even approach that you were talking about with choristers working with something like a professional orchestra than the way that same organization approaches their musicians?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I know Michael's probably dying to jump in here for a few things, but I mean, I will say I have been on both sides, so I know exactly. I share that same kind of like, don't take this as an offense, if someone tries to offer you a gig for X amount of dollars. And case in point, right, as a artistic director of a chorus for 20 years or what have you, I would get offers from the chorus. Can you have 80 people learn all this music and then come and give 8 hours of their day twice? And we're prepared to give your whole organization $1,000. And you know what I mean? But like in the budget, $1,000 is, it's occupying a line, but the line just said chorus, and where in reality, chorus is people and artistry and time and investment and all those things. So, it's a shame when that happens. And then again, that's just where it is like, do we really want to do it though? I mean, this is an awesome opportunity. It's this opportunity. And it's never a bad opportunity, you know. If Moody wants to do Verdi Requiem and says, Eric, can you find 80 singers? I mean, I can find 80 singers that want to sing Verdi Requiem with Moody, you know. So it's like, and even if it's just, we're going to split this $1,000 and then, okay, you know, okay, it'll be fun. But I mean, it somewhere along, so I want to go on the record saying it really shouldn't be that way, right? I mean, everyone should be compensated for the value of the work they're doing, and it's all necessary work. And I'm not saying everyone needs to get paid exactly the same amount, because that's a different subject. But I do think it, and this is going to be a can of worms here, but I do think it comes from this just kind of archaic inherited idea that, you know, that this classical music has this elitism in it, it has this patriarchy in it, and it has this system of gods, demigods, and regular people, right? And somewhere in there, the singers have been deemed the regular people. So it's like, yeah, almost that the way they are considered in terms of budgeting and in terms of the use of time is on a regular person's time, whereas the artistic director, you would never dream of, you know, lowballing them or making them feel like their time was being wasted or they weren't being compensated fairly. And you know, I don't have the answers to changing that, but I see that as part of what contributes to this culture of, you know, singers are regular people. And one more thing on that would be that there is, I think, a positive thing about singing is that I will say it is seen as universally inclusive, no matter how good someone is or how bad someone is, and for better or for worse. I do think that the general public has this kind of perception like anyone can sing. They might not be great, but you can put them in a choir somewhere and hide them, but it's doable. And you don't think, I'm just going to hand that person off the street and bassoon and see what happens, right?
A viola? Okay. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I won't go down that road, right? Against people, but so I think that's a good thing, right? The fact that people see it as inclusive is a good thing, and I think, but I think that has also been used kind of in this argument against it to say like, well, anyone can do it, so find anyone, you know, and that's not the case. So, Michael, what did I?
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think like that's like, I want to say something like, you know, so I really do like to think about classical music in terms of both class and caste, both those things. And I think in terms of how singers are treated, the term that comes to mind is they're often treated like amateurs, whereas instrumentalists are treated like blue collar workers, right? And conductors are treated like factory owners or something like that, right? Which say that, so I think that there is some sense that that anyone can sing, and so why should you have to pay them for the thing that they're, you know, that they just want to do? And I think, you know, I really also, you know, maybe what I would say is, I think a particular affliction of the classical music industry, and I always like to use the term classical music industry because to separate it from like the music itself. We're not talking about Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. We're talking about like the industrial setup that drew you work with people in this industry. You know, something about the nature of music makes people view it less as an industry, right? And I think therefore that makes musical workers, musical laborers more subject to different kinds of exploitation, right? And I think singers are exploited in a particular way, and instrumentalists are maybe exploited in a different way. But yeah, I think if we really think of music, the site of the musical rehearsal, you know, the building, Symphony Center, the DePaul School of Music, you know, if we think of that as a workplace, I think that sort of might help us treat our musical workers better.
That was fabulous, and there were a number of really profound things that I want to follow up on. First and foremost, what is your definition and distinction between class and caste?
Sure. I think caste, I think I would say, caste, I think, has more to do with kind of social prestige, maybe is how I think. I'm I'm not a I'm not a scholar of sort of post-colonial studies, though I wish I were. But I think that when I think about it, like the way the term caste is used in the context of like India,
Mm-hmm.
has I think has economic implications, of course, but I think of primarily as a prestige thing. I think we see this in academia a lot as well, where you've got like professors with tenure are viewed by the profession as more prestigious than adjunct faculty or something like that. Whereas class I view specifically as kind of an economic system of haves and have-nots, right? So essentially, like just in Marxian terms, like you got your capitalists and your proletarians, and now we have this new term, the precariat, which is the kind of like portmanteau of precarious and proletariat, you know. So I guess I really do think of class as specifically an economic framework.
Good. And on that line, the caste system, especially that we're talking about here now with this, isn't just something that is impacted into the field by outside forces. Meaning, it's not the board of directors. It's not necessarily an administrator. The actual artists themselves do just fine instituting their own caste system between one another. And I think that's more of what's maybe connected to a little bit of the original topic of this, which is, why does this distinction happen? And we see a caste system inside professional classical music, regardless of what sector within that it's going to be. And it has to be learned behavior, or at least I hope it's learned behavior. It's something that a student goes to school, they get this instilled with them, and when they get out into the real world, because everyone that preceded them had the same experience, that now becomes their reality. And so it's just easier to remain and keep moving in that groove, so to speak. That point. Eric, I see you like nodding and smiling.
I know Michael's about to say something really brilliant, probably. So I was just, well, I mean, yes, I think you're right. I mean, just take it back to the beginning, right? When you were in elementary school, a lot of us, what did they take us? They took us to see the symphony, right? They didn't take us to see a chorus somewhere.
Right.
They didn't take us to see a brass band play, or they took us to the symphony. And someone there said, and I'm trying not to sound pejorative, because I don't think that going to see the symphony is a bad thing. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I'm trying to, someone there basically said, this experience is going to be very special. We are going to see very special people do very special things. And somewhere along there, you learn the fact that, and reinforced with popular culture too, that the rich people go to the symphony, hoity-toity people go to the symphony, upper class people, and we don't want that to be the case, right? I think every symphony would say, we're trying to make sure that that's not the case, while living the fact that that is the case, right? But they don't want that, and I don't want that for them. But it just is all this intersectionality with class and wealth, and who has it, and who participates, and at what age do you participate. But the fact that you could go as a student to the elementary school, go to see the symphony one time, and then somewhere as an adult, you have this bias that the symphony is for rich people, the symphony is for some sort of elitism of understanding, and that not everybody has. I mean, that somehow was given to you, communicated to you, externally, without anyone just saying, oh, by the way, you know what I mean? We're taking you to the symphony, but unless you're rich, you're never going to be able to go after today.
Right. There's no malicious intent involved, but there's still a byproduct of unconscious bias.
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think that's part of how we end up with this notion here. And then that just only gives this unconscious, it buttresses this notion that these people doing this very special thing need to be treated extra specially, And who's the head of that? It's the conductor. And oof, you know what I mean? He's the most special person. And then there are some other special people. And, you know, it is this kind of problematic. It can really lead to problems that we've all seen. So you know, Michael, come on, what's your...
Throw some words at this, Michael. Yeah.
No, I think everything Eric's saying is great. I mean, I agree with all that. You know, yeah, I think that the conductor genius problem is like obviously a major problem in the field. We've recently seen that with the passing of James Levine, obviously, just to name names, which say that I think that the conductor, the figure of the conductor, the conductor is like, I don't know, the closest thing that we have in our society to like a magician or like a wizard, a wizard or a sorcerer or something. Like the conductor waves their arms, doesn't make any sound themselves, but all this glorious sound happens. You know what I mean? So it really feels like it's a kind of like a mystical power, and like it's like, and no one really knows what makes a good conductor, and conductors are often like, I think, not very well evaluated. Which is, which say that when you audition for an orchestra, if you're a violinist, you audition for an orchestra. What you do is you and the other 200 or 300 or 1,000 violinists auditioning, play some standardized excerpts behind a screen with members of the orchestra, right? So people that are currently got a violinist and an oboe player, and there's a whole committee of professional, musicians listening to you. When you hire a conductor, that isn't always necessarily the case that it's like the musicians have a lot of input, they have some input, but like lots of different stakeholders are involved in hiring a conductor. So how conductors are evaluated is not really standardized, I think, in a way that produces the best conductors sometimes. And that can be really problematic if you get someone in place and they're there for a while. To Eric's point about intersectionality, I mean, I think that's also a really important point about the space of the sort of symphony orchestra, and I think Doug Shadle has written about this. Guy who recently has a book out about the Dvorak Ninth Symphony. I really think that symphonic music in the U.S. was specifically, at a certain point, advanced as a civilizing thing, right? So those uncivilized Southern Europeans need to go and listen to German symphonic music to make themselves better. And I think, yes, so we do often feel like the space of the symphony orchestra is for a certain kind of people. And, obviously the rich person is, most obvious, but it's like, let's be honest, it's probably a white rich person, and it's probably a male rich person. So it really is all three of the kind of like gender, socioeconomic class, and race are really, you can't really have one without the other, at least in our kind of common discourse. I think those three things really intersect, and so I think we have to analyze the problem as such.
This topic in general, from my perspective, this does not impact me professionally the same way it impacts both of you. And this is why I'm finding both of your perspective on this particularly interesting. And hopefully the folks that are listening to this feel the same way. You both are in positions where you are academics, you are conductors, and Eric, in your case, you've got the third thing of now you're a vocalist. You come from the singing sect of things, which has that additional layer of caste system built onto it. And I'm just trying to pull all of these different threads together because it seems clear and obvious that they intersect. At various degrees, they definitely intersect. And there are all of these other forces that have evolved over time that help perpetuate and move them. Being people who are in academia, you are uniquely positioned to be in a place where you can at least instill change. You can at least be the butterfly that flaps its wings to start to bring about longer term change. Are these conversations even happening on the side of academia where you're asking yourselves, what can we do about this if we feel that this is a thing that needs to be dealt with?
Well,
No
Michael
pressure.
and I talk about it all the time.
No.
So,
Yep.
You have plans. There are detailed plans.
yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, to your point, we have, as tenured professors, we do have safety to where we can say some things, and if that makes someone outside of academia not want to work with us, we still have our place inside of academia, as and it probably will make someone else outside of academia want to work with us more to kind of see what this dialogue is about and the discourse is about. So I think go
I was
ahead. Are
going to
you?
say, yeah, because I want to jump into that's a fabulous statement, and you used the protection of a tenured position to protect from potential outside influence. But does that protection, is it needed also for influence inside academia? Can you say these things without having to worry about blowback internally within your organization?
Well, yes and no. I mean, sorry to have that answer once again, but I think it depends on where you are, and it depends on who your colleagues are. I mean, Michael is a wonderful colleague, and it's nice to have someone that we share some values here and can have this discourse. But I can imagine there are plenty of people who find themselves on an island, wanting to have a discourse with I don't know, what we would call them institutionalists, conservatory institutionalists, who are still just, dead set on saying we train people to win jobs. They're going into the orchestra, teach them how to work in that environment, and don't make waves. And certainly pre-tenure, you don't want to make waves with someone like that either, and that can be a dangerous position.
I have nothing to say other than profound agreement with what Eric just said, which say that Eric and I have tenure. This is a tremendously privileged thing to have, and so I think we both try to take that. We both try to own that privilege and take that really seriously, and figure out and figure out how to be thoughtful about how to best use that. Drew, I think to your original question, which was like, do you want to be the butterfly that flaps its wings? I have come to the short answer to that question is yes. But that wasn't my original answer to the question, which say that I, had this sort of circuitous path where I really thought I was wanted to just have a straight ahead orchestra job. Studied in Russia when I was 16. Really was just like gung ho about orchestra rep. Wanted to just be a big music director one day. And just the more that I got to know the work and the industry, again, I'm going to insist on calling it an industry, the more I realized that this is not exactly, that wasn't necessarily the artistic work that I wanted to be doing. And, an administrative colleague of mine, who's in arts administration, refers to their job in administration as creative, which really surprised me when he told me this. And I think I surprised this person even more when I came back to him and said, I view my work as a conductor as something political rather than creative. So it's funny to me that we have like an administrator that views themselves as creative and a conductor that views themselves as doing politics in some sense. I'm not sure if that's a.
Well, no, it is. It's good, but I definitely want to even go back to the original question a bit more, which is, yes, you guys are talking about this topic, but what do you do as far as actionable results? Because you're in positions that you get to create the curricula that students actually consume. You get to have those conversations.
Sure. I think it's an evolving discourse. I think the process too is, I speak for myself. I would say something that I still feel like I'm learning about and want to pass on that knowledge to as well, which I don't want to sidebar, but I'll do one sidebar. I do think that there is this evolution in academia, or I'm hoping there is, right? That is that a conductor is someone who is still learning, evolving as their career progresses. And I know that sounds, like, well, why wouldn't that be the case? But I do think there is this stigma, even 50 years ago, that a professor of conducting knew everything. Like, that's how you get that job. You knew it all. You knew all the style. Everyone was coming to do it perfectly with you. And it just wasn't true. I mean, it just wasn't true, really. I mean, there's wonderful conductors, but no one can know it all. And then as more research happens, I mean, even the very fact that a conductor can say, I'm going to learn this along with you in some ways, and we're going to make change. I think that's kind of how it has to happen. And I think that's part of what we are doing. So I will say I'll speak for me, Michael, I won't speak for you, but it will be, it is incorporating through repertoire. It is incorporating through guest speakers. It is incorporating through lesson plans, through, through contextualizing music history, contextualizing programming, and seeing it through new eyes, I think is part of the plus for me is that the students are eager to do it. The students are, you know what I mean? It's not abandoning the old because, Brahms is wonderful. I don't want the Brahms Requiem to go anywhere, but it's about what else can we teach in context to make a larger whole for our students to learn from, and to teach them that the system they're inheriting has these biases. So can you spot them? And when you spot them, how do you maneuver them? Are you going to disengage? Are you going to try to affect change? Or are you just going to dodge a bullet and move forward? They have to be prepared for all that. Whereas I think a lot of people 20, 30 years ago just walked in and it was like, do what you're told. This is how it works.
Yeah, Drew, you should have gotten two guests that don't agree on everything. Because what happens is Eric says a thing, and I'm like, yeah, what he said basically.
I can mix things up if you like as well too. Because Eric said something that I really actually kind of want to challenge and push back on. Not so much challenge and push back, but ask a difficult follow-up to that, which is you're talking about realizing unconscious biases. And that introduces the very difficult question of what puts either of you in a position to be able to be qualified to declare something an unconscious bias.
I think that's a great question. And I think that would just kind of takes me back to my point that I want to be learning on this journey and sharing as I'm going along. Whereas I was criticizing the conductor of old not being able to know everything about style of every piece ever, I would say that's the same thing now. I mean, I would not consider myself the expert on it, and I can see myself tripping up on it. It's the discourse that I hope America is having ever since, last year, the death of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, which is how do I fit into this cultural context? What are the mistakes I make? And it is these micro fixes and these micro attentions and micro changes that can really add up to a whole. So I don't want to give the impression that it's me going, you have misbehaved and you walked right into it and I saw it coming because I'm so woke, that term. It's not that at all, you know what I mean? Oftentimes it's, hey, I stepped into it this way and I don't want you to do it. And let's talk about it. Why was it important that so-and-so said that this programming of this piece was problematic, right? And let's talk about all sides of that issue. And again, that's something academia gives you access to do. I can just stop rehearsing. I'm not costing the company thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars because I ended up taking an hour just to say, tell me what you think about this. Fifth chair, tell me what you think about this. And they have to actually have an opinion, and they should have one, and they do have one. And every time I've stopped for those conversations, even the difficult ones, we've all come out better for it, in my opinion. And it's a step forward. It's not a triumph of we solved it. It's just about moving forward, kind of every day.
Michael?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, I had several different threads that I wanted to sort of follow up on there. Maybe most broadly, I would say that, one of my favorite books is this book by an author named Jacques Attali, who's an economist, actually, not a musicologist, a book called Noise, The Political Economy of Music. And he has this really startling claim in Noise, which is that music is a product of its culture, of course. It comes from the culture that it's from. But also, it's better at exploring existing codes than other kind of art forms and socioeconomic forms, and so it actually predicts the future as well, right? So it's a really striking argument. Great book. He thinks that, and he has all these ways that he like looks at the history of music as predicting the next kind of socioeconomic development. And I think, and I really buy this. This is like one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite books. And I think that actually is what's happening in music right now. Is I think our culture as a whole is having a conversation, and even though our industry is a little behind, I would say, our younger musicians are not. I think our younger musicians are kind of way ahead of us in terms of their thinking and in terms of the changes they want to make to the industry. And so I think there is really space in academia where you can have a lot of impact by holding space for difficult but frank conversations with 18 to 25-year-olds, because they're ahead of us in a certain way. And what I always tell them is, I always tell my students, I say like, don't call me maestro, first of all. No maestro. Call me Professor Lewanski if you want. Call me Michael if you want. Don't call me Dr. Lewanski, because I don't have a doctorate. There's this one time when like one lovely student, fellow Georgian student, came up to me after a performance and said, "Dr. Lewanski, I just want to thank you so much for having me play in this concert." And my partner was standing next to me, and she said, "He doesn't have a doctorate."
Yeah.
So I always tell them,
and of course, that person was an instrumentalist, so
right,
yeah, they had to say.
Exactly. No, but the other thing is, never call me maestro. And here's how I want you to think about me. Think of me as an older and more experienced musician than you are, that you can learn from, who probably legitimately has a lot to teach you. But also think of me as a musician who is still developing with you, right? And so I think like humanizing the conductor, sort of just having like, a really healthy attitude towards what a conductor does is a thing that our industry could do, both kind of on the academic side and on the professional side.
Can I chime in there too? That made me think
Yes.
of something, which would be along what we've just been talking about too, would be, I think I have personally seen, even in the last year, right, with Black Lives Matter, with people, this discourse in race in America and inequality in America, what have you, that it is emerging, now that time has passed, a significant amount of time has passed, it is emerging a distinction between people that are engaging the conversation and people who just don't wish to engage the conversation.
Yeah.
So on some way, the students are very much engaging the conversation. So, it's not even that someone at the level of myself or Professor Lewanski would be in an authority to talk about what is and what isn't bias, but in a lot of ways, it's a conduit to
Right.
people who really won't engage. And it's like, if I don't do my own set of research or thinking, I won't have the vocabulary to speak with these students on this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then really, what a missed opportunity, right? It's like, how on earth would the student who is really just rich in this vocabulary and feelings gonna ever communicate with someone who, I'm just gonna say maybe older, but they don't necessarily have to be, but who does not wish to see any sort of change? What works for them, and the vocabulary just isn't there for them to communicate. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of serving as that kind of middle level person that can maybe speak to both constituencies somehow to advance the conversation.
There's some great perspectives on that, and a few immediate thoughts is, I wholeheartedly agree that younger generations infrequently fall on the wrong side of history, whatever the subject matter is going to be. The other one, Eric, you had mentioned, Black Lives Matters, George Floyd. Those conversations have exploded to the national level and happen on many different strata within that. Here in our very niche little world, the things that we're talking about that are based on caste system and some of the negativities that go into it, there isn't a similar sort of dissemination and platform for those kinds of conversations. So what you and Michael are doing at DePaul, and perhaps colleagues at other universities having some similar impacts, it's still, from a comparative sense, far less with, at scale, looking at the same level of magnitude change inside our industry. And Michael, I think it's fine to call us an industry. If anything, there is the business aspect of it that drives everything, because regardless of what anyone thinks, this is not a state-funded system. Right. It's still capitalism. Right. And that money impacts all of these decisions. And tying that all together, Eric, again, what you had talked about with the lack of vocabulary among some individuals made me think of the difficulty bringing about change because there is no reward system in place to be someone who wants to be an agent of change necessarily. You're rewarded in this field by maintaining status quo as opposed to the contrary. And I just wanted to throw that concept in just to get some feedback again from both of your perspectives of people who do get to help shape the minds of that younger generation moving up and into the business. Michael, you look like you've got thoughts going on this.
Oh,
no?
God,
Yes?
no. I mean, plenty, always thoughts, but I think, maybe I want to say that I think the most important thing at this point is for us to have a good analysis of what the problems are. Yeah. And that's kind of the level at which I am operating right now, is like really to take stock of where we are as a field and to try to get as nuanced an understanding of its history, how it got to the place that it is, and what the actual problems are. Which say that I think, and then we can talk about what we should change and how and the speed. But I'm not totally convinced yet that we have a consensus within the industry of what I don't think we have a great set of analytical tools, right? So I think.
I wholheartedly agree. Yes.
And I know you from your end. I mean, like working strictly in the sort of business area of this. I think you I think spoken very eloquently about this, and which is one of the reasons I always enjoy talking to you. I think another thing that education can do is it can educate. That's a little tautological, but I think that there needs to be more dialogue, let's say, between scholars that are studying the field and performers that are working in it, right? So I think that school music at DePaul and probably many other schools of music, we never had an anti-racist training until November of last year. So I think a lot of the conceptual framework is still new to people in the field, and people need. I want to make changes. I am making changes. I'm making clear, decisive changes. I think I also want to sort of like make space for the field to readjust how it thinks about itself. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's maybe one way that I want to put it. I think, put another way, there are some changes that we can make right now. We should make those changes. Those are easy changes to make, I think. For me, like, programming diversity is just like the least difficult thing in the world. It's just, George Lewis has this notion of the myth of absence. It's like, some people are like, oh, where do we find black composers? I'm like, oh, literally just Google it. I mean, it's like, it's very, very easy. Like, I have no patience whatsoever for people that somehow resist diversifying programming. So I think there's some short-term and like diversifying sort of personnel within institutions. Mm-hmm. That may is a little bit longer, but I think there's some short-term steps we can take, some medium-term steps we can take, and then some long-term steps. And I think basically my argument is that we need strategies for all three of those things, and strategies for the medium and long-term will take probably like lots of rigorous analysis and thought on our parts.
Well, whether you intended it to be this way or not, you actually brought things full circle quite nicely. Oh, wow. with the reference to an increase of communication and collaboration between academics who study the things we're talking about and the professionals who actually implement them.
Right.
And there is this gulf between the two. And I think this is kind of a good place to bring things to a close here. And I am immediately reminded of one of my favorite quotes from the author Douglas Adams, which is, "I may not have gone where I intended to go with this conversation, but I ended up where we needed to be." and I think that defines where we've actually gone through with this last hour of chatting, because it's been exciting, it's been exhilarating, but not for all the reasons I intentionally designed and structured this conversation, which is, I love it. I mean, this is one of the things that, Michael, I've known you long enough now. This is one of the things that you do best, whether it's intentional or not, is move conversations in directions.
Get us off track.
Get us off track in the best possible way.
Thank you, Drew.
We get lost in places that we didn't dream would be this wonderful. Right? Yeah. That defines what we're doing, and I'm really happy with it as well too. So I'm already thinking of 2 or 3 other topics of where this could potentially lead for other shows to bring people in to talk about in more detail what we're doing. I mean, we didn't even really get as far down into what I was hoping with, some of the caste system differential, which I think I definitely need to have just a dedicated show to that topic as well, even with different perspectives and voices. Maybe some people who don't agree together so much. God damn it. People are just so nice to each other.
Yeah.
But I do want to thank both of my guests today, Eric and Michael, for taking the time out on a Saturday afternoon to sit down and have this conversation, which is not the sort of thing that people always think about, but probably the thing they need to do more of.
Well, thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for taking a listen to this. I hope you have a good day and pop back in for the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye. All right. Perfect timing, Kat.